Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show where we dig into a pile of sources, pull out the real gems, and give you that shortcut to, well, knowing what you're talking about. Today, we're tackling a question that might just flip your whole idea of yourself upside down. What if who you are isn't, fixed, like set in stone? What if your identity, maybe even your soul, is more like this swirling cloud of possibilities, always being shaped by how you connect with the world and how the world, maybe even the divine, connects back with you? We are diving deep, really deep, into a seriously mind-bending idea today. Can we understand the human soul as this emergent pattern, something coherent that arises, kind of like how a quantum superposition collapses into a definite reality when it's observed? Our main guide here is Skylar Fiction's book, Breath of the Cosmos, a Christian pantheist guide to quantum living. It's provocative, to say the least, and we'll be bouncing his ideas off insights from quantum physics, neuroscience, philosophy of mind, theology, the whole lot. Our mission, like always, is to pull out the key stuff, find the surprising bits, and just give you a clear path through this really fascinating, complex concept. Fiction basically says the soul, made in the divine image, is like a quantum superposition, this field of unfolding possibility, and it becomes concrete, becomes real through observation, through our choices, through relationships. This isn't just, academic navel-gazing. It really challenges how you see yourself, your choices, your connections, even your spiritual journey. It's really about understanding what identity even is in a world that's always changing. Okay, let's unpack this. This deep dive, it promises to be mind-bending, but hopefully in the best way possible. We're going through some dense but really beautiful ideas here.
It really is. And what's so compelling, I think, is how fiction tries to build this bridge, right? Between things that seem miles apart, quantum mechanics, this really esoteric physics, and these ancient, deep questions about spirituality and, well, the soul. He's trying to show how they might actually talk to each other. And that raises huge questions about what it even means to be a coherent self, an evolving self, in a universe that seems so interconnected. It's ambitious, no doubt. But his work gives us this unique lens to look at where these different fields might meet or where they might clash.
Okay, let's start right at the foundation of fiction's whole metaphor. The
Yeah.
quantum stuff. Our everyday world, classical physics, it feels pretty solid, doesn't it? Things are or they aren't. A switch is on or off. A cat is alive or dead, binary. Definite. We're just used to things being clear-cut, in fixed states.
Absolutely. And that classical view, Newton's physics, it works perfectly for apples falling or planets going around the sun, no problem there. But quantum physics, down at the tiny subatomic scale, it introduces this radical shift. It's almost confusing at first. Down there, things don't just exist in one state. They exist in what's called a superposition, which is like a smeared out blend of multiple possible states all at the same time. Until, that is, you make an observation or a measurement. Think about an electron. Before you look, it's not a point A or point B. It's more like smeared out in a cloud of probability. It's kind of effectively in both A and B states at once.
Right.
And the key thing, the really weird part, is that this isn't just us not knowing. Before you measure it, the electron genuinely has no single position. It's pure potential.
Right. It's not just hidden, it's undecided.
Right. Exactly. Undecided is a good way to put it.
And that leads to the famous wave function collapse, right? When you do observe it or measure it, that wave function, that spread out potential, it just collapses. It snaps into one definite state. It picks one possibility and suddenly becomes real in that specific way. The classic example, the one everyone talks about, is the double slit experiment. That really nails it, I think. You fire single particles, like electrons, at a screen with two slits. If you don't watch which slit they go through, they act like waves. They create this interference pattern on the detector screen behind it, which means they must have gone through both slits somehow.
Simultaneously, like a wave splashing through both.
Yeah. But if you put a detector there, trying to see which slit the particle actually uses, poof, the interference pattern disappears. They start acting like tiny billiard balls going through one slit or the other.
Observation altered the outcome, fundamentally.
It's totally mind-bending. I remember reading about John Wheeler calling it a participatory universe. Like, how we choose to look actually determines the particle's past, in a way.
That's precisely the crucial point. And you can see why fiction grabs onto it as such a powerful metaphor. It's not just about passively gathering information. The act of measurement itself fundamentally changes the system. It brings one possibility out of many into actual existence. And for fiction, this deep indeterminacy, right at the heart of physical reality, becomes this profound, almost sacred metaphor for the human soul.
So he's taking this like weird behavior of tiny particles and saying, hey, maybe we're like that too. Our soul isn't just one fixed thing. He literally writes, you are not one thing. You are a field of unfolding possibility.
Hmm.
He's comparing the soul to that quantum wave function, holding all these potential selves inside it. Think about it, the potential in you to be kind or maybe cruel, faithful or full of doubt, brave or timid, all these opposites, these human potentials, they exist within us, he says, but they haven't collapsed into just one reality yet.
He calls it the completeness of potential. And he sees that capacity itself as the sacred thing, the core of what it means to be human.
And this reframes that old theological idea, the imago Dei, the image of God.
It does in a really interesting way. What's insightful is how fiction sees the divine image not as some static blueprint, like a cookie cutter shape we're stamped into. Instead, it's this capacity for multiplicity within unity. It's about being vessels of creative potential. So our divine nature isn't being a fixed thing, but having this inherent openness to becoming, a dynamic potential that mirrors God's own creativity.
Which leads right into his biggest spiritual analogy. Just like observation collapses a quantum state, fiction suggests that consciousness, our attention, maybe even God's attention, divine regard, plays a similar role in shaping who we become.
Yeah.
He says it's only when we observe a particle that its superposition collapses into a definite state. Then he flips that into this powerful ethical idea. Our identities are shaped by what we see and by how we are seen. And this is where it gets really interesting for me. He's basically saying our gaze, our attention has creative power. He gives these examples, like a child observed with love developing totally differently than one watched with suspicion.
Yeah.
And the line that really stuck with me was, to see another as divine is to collapse their highest possibility into form. Like just by seeing the best in someone with reverence, we actually help bring that best self into reality.
That's a huge claim, isn't it? And if you connect it to the bigger picture, fiction is really just extending something we already kind of know from human development, from sociology and psychology. You see echoes in the looking glass self idea. We build our self-concept based on how we think others see us. And psychologically, it definitely resonates with things like the Pygmalion effect, where teacher expectations influence student performance, or labeling theory.
Right, like self-fulfilling prophecies.
Exactly. The power of observation and expectation, even just between humans, is undeniably transformative. The key insight fiction adds is that our identities are just profoundly relational. They're constantly being sculpted by how others see us, and, he'd argue, ultimately by how God sees us.
It's a beautiful thought that our attention could be so creative. But, okay, let's get back to the science for a second. What does observation really mean in quantum physics? We've been talking about it in a human sense, like looking or paying attention. But does it have to be a conscious mind involved for that quantum collapse to happen? That seems like a really crucial difference.
That's a very important question, yeah. And it's where fiction's interpretation often parts ways with the mainstream scientific view. The dominant idea, the Copenhagen interpretation, Bohr, Heisenberg, those guys, they say collapse happens with measurement. But crucially, they're deliberately agnostic about what counts as a measurement. They don't insist it has to be a conscious mind. Basically, any interaction with a macroscopic apparatus or environment that irreversibly records the outcome will do.
So like a Geiger counter clicking or even just a photon bouncing off something.
Exactly. And this is where decoherence theory comes in and clarifies things further. It explains how a quantum system, just by interacting with its environment, bumping into air molecules, stray photons, whatever, very, very quickly loses its neat superposition. It gets tangled up with the environment and appears to choose a definite state. That's why we don't see Schrodinger's cat being both alive and dead in the real world. The environment is constantly observing it, constantly decohering it, almost instantly.
Ah, okay. So the universe is kind of constantly measuring itself through all these tiny interactions without needing us humans to be looking.
That's the standard view, yes. The universe, by and large, observes itself through decoherence. However, there has been a minority of physicists, Wigner, Wheeler, Henry Stapp, people, fiction sites, who have played with the idea that consciousness is special in this process, that maybe it does play a unique role in collapse. And fiction is clearly inspired by that line of thought. He says things like, every collapse of a quantum wave is a moment of divine attention. The act of awareness, of witnessing, is not an afterthought. It is central. And then he runs with it, talking about God as the ultimate observer and us humans as junior observers, saying things like, your attention brings beauty into being. Your love collapses potential into communion. What's compelling is how he takes the weirdness of quantum physics and sees it as sacramental, as a sign of God's intimate involvement and the universe's inherent potential.
So just to be clear, fiction isn't necessarily saying our individual thoughts are literally flipping quantum switches across the universe in a scientifically provable way. It's more that the metaphor itself highlights the profound, active role of attention, love, and consciousness in shaping reality, both our inner reality and maybe even the world around us.
Precisely. He's using the physics as a springboard for theological and ethical reflection. His approach doesn't really fit with, say, the many worlds interpretation where every possibility just happens in another universe. He's focused on this reality, our experience, and the moral weight of observation within it. He's closer, maybe, to something like cubism, where the wave function is about an observer's knowledge or belief. But fundamentally, he sees the openness of quantum reality as evidence of freedom and creativity woven into the cosmos by God, an imprint of the divine.
And this idea of potentiality, of openness, links into the bigger concept of emergence, doesn't it? But he scales it up to the whole cosmos.
Yes, exactly. Emergence is a huge concept in science. In physics, we talk about how the predictable classical reality we see emerges from that underlying quantum fuzziness through decoherence. It explains why big things, like us or chairs, behave reliably, instead of being in multiple places at once. The stable world emerges. And in complexity theory, you have emergent phenomena, like temperature emerging from molecule movements, or a flock of birds moving as one coherent thing, even though no single bird is in charge. New properties arise from the interactions of simpler parts.
And fiction takes this scientific idea and gives it this massive spiritual spin. He asks, what if the soul itself is an emergent phenomenon? Something that arises when matter gets organized in really complex, coherent ways, like in living beings, especially conscious ones. He sees God's action not as like supernatural zaps from outside, but as the ceaseless emergence of order, life, and consciousness from the quantum breath that pervades reality. He writes, superposition is the scientific equivalent of divine immanence. We are waves of possibility. We carry divinity not as a label, but as a structure of being.
It's a powerful reframing. He's suggesting the very potential inherent in the universe is a manifestation of God's presence within it. What's really insightful, again, is how he reads the physics. What scientists often call weirdness or indeterminacy, he sees as sacramental, as a signpost pointing to divine presence and creative freedom. For him, this openness to the foundation of reality isn't a bug, it's a feature. It means freedom and creativity are baked in by design, reflecting a dynamic God, not just a static clockmaker.
Okay, so we've explored this really deep, evocative metaphor, but we need to be really clear about its limits, too. Are we, as human beings, literally quantum superpositions in the same way an electron is, scientifically speaking?
Well, in practice, no. Not in any straightforward, literal sense. And this is where we have to understand it primarily as an analogy, highlighting potentiality, not a direct scientific claim about how our brains work at the quantum level. By the time you get to the scale of neurons, let alone whole brains or bodies, any quantum coherence would have vanished almost instantly due to constant interaction with the warm, wet environment of the brain. The physicist Max Tegmark did the math back in 2000. He calculated that quantum coherence in a single neuron would last for maybe 10 to the minus 13 seconds at body temperature.
Which is basically nothing.
Essentially, none of that quantum weirdness survives long enough to significantly affect how neurons fire. Now, there is the controversial Orch-Aurora theory by Penrose and Hameroff, which fiction mentions briefly. It suggests quantum effects might happen inside tiny structures called microtubules within neurons. But it's important to stress that this remains highly speculative and is not widely accepted by most neuroscientists and physicists.
Okay, so if our minds aren't literally quantum computers playing with wave functions, does that mean the whole metaphor just falls apart? Or does it still hold value?
I think it absolutely still holds value. The metaphor doesn't break down. It just shifts its focus. It moves from being a literal physical description to being a powerful spiritual and psychological insight. It challenges those simplistic religious ideas of the soul as this fixed, unchanging thing. Instead, it resonates much more with biblical themes of transformation. Behold, I make all things new.
Right.
It encourages this idea of continuous spiritual growth. Fiction puts it nicely. To follow Jesus is not to choose once and be done. It is to remain open to continual transformation. That line itself cleverly echoes the superposition idea, remaining open to possibilities instead of collapsing too soon into a rigid, fixed identity. The key insight isn't about quantum mechanics in the brain. It's about embracing our profound capacity for change and becoming.
That makes a lot more sense. So shifting skills now from the subatomic to the brain itself, let's dive into the neuroscience of the self. If the soul is some kind of emergent property, then the brain is ground zero, right? That's its immediate physical home.
Hmm.
And neuroscience in recent decades has just completely changed how we see the brain. It's not static hardware, it's this marvel of plasticity, it's constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
Neurons, synapses, the connections there continually reconfiguring in response to experience, learning, trauma, practice. Even adult brains aren't fixed. They can make new connections, even grow new neurons.
Absolutely. And this inherent malleability, this plasticity, provides a really solid biological basis for why we might indeed be, as fiction puts it, a field of unfolding possibility. Our brains are literally built to be dynamic systems of potential, constantly adapting and rewiring themselves. What's so compelling is that neuroscience gives us concrete biological evidence for this capacity for change. And that lends real weight to fiction's metaphors of becoming and transformation, even if the direct quantum links are more, let's say, poetic license than literal science.
Yeah.
Our biology itself supports an evolving self.
Think about a real-world example, like someone practicing compassion meditation. If they stick with it, they can measurably strengthen the brain circuits linked to empathy and kindness. Their whole disposition can shift towards being more compassionate.
Yeah.
That's like a real-world case of the capacity for more compassion collapsing into an actual trait through focused attention and practice.
This?
Fiction even makes this playful link to the quantum Zeno effect. Where rapidly observing a quantum state can kind of freeze it. He uses that as a metaphor for how sustained attention in meditation might stabilize certain positive states of mind, stopping the mind from just jumping all over the place.
It's a cool image. And the underlying idea that focused awareness can quiet the mental chatter and cultivate stable, positive states definitely has support in cognitive neuroscience and therapy. It shows how our internal observation guides our becoming.
Yeah, it really
It's a powerful illustration of shaping our inner landscape through attention.
Okay, another huge piece connecting neuroscience and this idea of an emergent soul is the narrative self. We humans, we're storytellers at heart, aren't we? We don't just have experiences, we weave them into a story.
Definitely.
Like Hassall and others pointed out, personal identity critically depends on the creation of stories about the self in one's life. We're always doing this autobiographical reasoning, looking back, making sense of things, fitting them into who we think we are. Philosophers like Daniel Dennett even call the self a center of narrative gravity. Like it's the main character we invent to organize our memories and plans.
Yeah, useful fiction in a way.
And neuroscience backs this up too with the default mode network in the brain. This network lights up when we're not focused outside, but thinking about ourselves, our past, our future, the brain's internal storyteller at work.
Right.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, connecting right back to fiction. Think about narrative therapy. It helps people reframe their life stories. Shift from seeing yourself as a broken victim to maybe a resilient survivor.
Yeah.
By actively rewriting that internal script, people can actually bring a different potential self into being.
Exactly.
If you change the story you tell, maybe focus on grace instead of just failure, you can genuinely shape a new identity, just like fiction says. You become what you are believed to be. Our sense of self can transform through the power of story.
This ties in so perfectly with fiction's idea in Breath of the Cosmos that the self isn't some fixed thing, but a continuity we achieve by integrating our experiences, by making them coherent. It's like collapsing all those scattered life events and possibilities into one cohesive, evolving self-story. The brain's constant storytelling process is a fantastic analog for fiction's ideas about identity formation.
Yeah.
It shows how our choices in constructing our narrative literally make us who we are. It's this dynamic dance between what happens to us and the meaning we make of it.
This picture of the brain constantly building, updating, re-narrating, it leads us to another really cutting-edge idea in cognitive science.
Yeah.
Predictive processing. How does that fit in with our self-concept?
Okay, so predictive processing paints the brain as this incredibly sophisticated prediction machine. Instead of just passively soaking up sensory data like a sponge, it's constantly making guesses, hypotheses about what's out there in the world. Then it compares those predictions to the actual sensory input it gets. If there's a mismatch, an error, it updates its internal model to minimize that error, to reduce surprise. So essentially, your brain is actively constructing your reality, including your sense of self.
Wow.
And researchers like Morikati and Regev have applied this to self-concept. They argue we have these strong priors about ourselves, deep-seated beliefs and expectations about who we are. And then we use self-verifying strategies to interpret feedback from others, often twisting it to fit the story we already have about ourselves to preserve that identity.
So it's like an internal collapse again. We're unconsciously choosing interpretations that confirm our existing self-narrative.
In a way, yes. We're often actively collapsing observations into outcomes that reinforce the story we've already chosen, unless something really big happens, some major surprise that forces us to revise that core narrative.
So hang on. This means we're not just objects being observed by others or by God. We're also active subjects, constantly observing the world and ourselves. Our own internal observer, or reflective consciousness, is playing a huge role in shaping which aspect of our potential, our wave function, actually gets expressed. We're part of our own creation process.
Exactly right. It gives us a potential mechanism for how emergent identity isn't just passively formed, but actively maintained through these continuous feedback loops. It's dynamic, not static. It really bridges the neuroscience with fiction's metaphor of quantum collapse into a stable state, showing how our internal models strive for coherence and a consistent self-image.
Now let's talk about connection, about how deeply intertwined we are with others. We'll get into mirror neurons and fiction's idea of entangled hearts. These neurons are amazing, right? They fire both when you do an action and when you just see someone else do the same action.
First found in monkeys. But the mechanism seems crucial for humans, too.
And in us, this system is thought to be behind our ability to just intuitively grasp others' intentions, feel their emotions. It kind of blurs the line between self and other. We literally feel together.
It's the basis for empathy, imitation, social understanding.
And fiction just runs with this in that Entangled Hearts chapter. He writes, just as particles lose distinct identity when entangled, human beings, too, are not fundamentally separate selves. We are embedded in a field of relationship.
Biologically, neurologically, emotionally, spiritually. Yeah, I remember that line.
He points to mirror neurons, even hints at quantum coherence within brain-body systems as scientific echoes of this deeper mystical unity. The implication is clear. We're not isolated islands.
But that raises a big question for a lot of people, doesn't it? If my soul is just like a node in this tangled web, how do I stay me? How do I not just dissolve into the we? Where's my unique identity in all this connection?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
Fiction would probably answer that love is the key. Love is the principle that allows for this mutual indwelling, this deep connection, without losing individual identity. He quotes Jesus, I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. It's unity without dissolution. And neuroscientifically, that actually makes a lot of sense, too. We know normal brain development absolutely needs social interaction. A baby's brain literally wires itself based on the patterns of loving caregivers. But here's the paradox. The child becomes their own unique self, precisely through that deep attunement and relational mirroring.
So connection actually creates individuality in a way.
Exactly. And this fits beautifully with fiction's observer-based identity model. A soul that is observed with love by parents, by community, by God, is called into its fullest, most coherent expression. While a soul that lacks that recognition, that loving gaze, might struggle to pull itself together to coalesce into a stable self, the key insight is that our self isn't an isolated fortress. It's porous, relational, deeply interconnected biologically and spiritually. The lines are blurrier than we think.
And this feeling of being a unified self, a coherent I, it even seems to have a physical signature in the brain, right? It's not just a feeling.
It does seem to. One really intriguing finding relates to gamma synchrony. High-frequency brainwaves, these gamma oscillations. Liu and colleagues found back in 2010 that when these waves synchronize across specific brain regions, it correlates really strongly with our feeling of unified conscious self-awareness, especially when we're thinking about ourselves. So the idea is that this coherence, this synchronization of neural activity across the brain might actually be the physical basis of the emergent thing we call conscious unity, or a single self.
Like billions of neurons firing in sync to create the me experiencing this conversation right now.
That's a great way to visualize it. It's like a neural symphony creating a unified experience. And other theories, like integrated information theory from Giulio Tononi, point in a similar direction. Consciousness arises from integrated information. The more integrated, the more unified the self. So coherence and integration seem to be the hallmarks of these emergent properties, whether it's a unified conscious moment or a stable sense of self over time.
So the soul, in this view, could literally be that dynamic, coherent pattern humming away in our brain, a unity emerging from billions of tiny parts firing together.
That captures it well. And what's compelling is that neuroscience provides real empirical evidence that a coherent identity can emerge from complex interactions. It's very much like how a quantum system's coherence leads to a stable, unified state. Our attention in this picture acts like that internal observer, binding all the different sensory inputs and memories into one conscious scene, effectively collapsing the superposition of all the things you could be perceiving into the specific reality you are consciously experiencing right now.
It's a powerful analogy. But this emergent view, as neat as it sounds, it really hits a wall when we think about the brain's fragility, doesn't it? What about dementia? Alzheimer's. These terrible diseases can seem to dismantle a person's identity, strip away memory, change personality so drastically.
Hmm.
Doesn't that just show that identity is dependent on the physical brain? If the brain's coherence falls apart, the emergent self just dissolves.
That is the stark challenge, yes. And it introduces a really critical counterargument to a purely emergent, brain-based view of the soul. You have philosophers like Joshua Ferris arguing quite strongly that the very fact that we often perceive a persistence of personhood, even amidst severe memory loss, suggests there must be some aspect of the self beyond just the physical brain function.
Like a core identity that remains.
He argues that the soul provides the stable underlying identity on which our narrative self is built. It's the anchor. And we hear anecdotal stories that resonate with this, don't we? Alzheimer's patients who can't remember their family but are deeply moved by an old hymn or show these sudden flashes of their former personality. It hints at something deeper that endures.
So how would Skylar fiction deal with this? If the soul is this field of possibility, what happens when the brain, its physical instrument, gets badly damaged?
Well, fiction might lean into his core metaphor. He could suggest that the deeper field of possibility associated with that soul, the underlying pattern, the essence might still exist somehow, even if its ability to express itself coherently in this physical realm is compromised by the brain damage.
So the potential is still there, but it can't manifest properly.
Something like that. It's as if the waveform has decohered due to the damage, losing its ability to project a stable conscious identity here and now. But the potentials themselves aren't necessarily destroyed, especially, he implies, if you believe that the soul's pattern, its essence, also exists in the mind of God. Held in that divine awareness, the potential might remain, even if the brain can no longer access or express it.
Okay, so it's a way to bridge the gap, trying to honor both the scientific reality of brain damage and that deep spiritual intuition or hope for some kind of continuity beyond just biology. That really pushes us into the broader philosophical and theological landscape now. For centuries, people have wrestled with consciousness. Is it just this weird byproduct of brain chemistry? Or could it be something more fundamental, woven into reality itself?
This is where panpsychism comes back into the picture.
Exactly. Panpsychism, the idea that some rudimentary form of mind or consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, maybe present even in particles. It used to be way out on the fringe, but it's definitely getting more attention now.
Why the comeback?
Well, partly because it offers a potential way around the really difficult, hard problem of consciousness. How does subjective feeling arise from objective matter? Panpsychism says, well, maybe mind was there all along, in some basic form. So human consciousness isn't something totally new appearing out of nowhere. It's more like a concentration or complexification of something universal. So as things get more complex, particles to atoms to brains, this inherent mind dust, as some call it, combines or intensifies, giving rise to higher consciousness, like an emergent soul.
That's the general idea, yeah. And you can see how fiction's Christian pantheism would be very sympathetic to this. He paints this picture of a world alive with divinity, not just in humans, but in the very fabric of existence. Remember his line, God is not outside the cosmos, God is the breath within the wave, the observer and the observed.
Yeah.
That resonates strongly with panpsychism's claim of universal mentality, but he gives that mentality a divine flavor.
But he's careful to distinguish between pantheism and panentheism, isn't he?
He is, and that's an important distinction. Pantheism often implies all is God, maybe reducing God to just the sum total of the universe. Panentheism, which fiction explicitly leans towards, says the world is in God, but God also transcends or exceeds the world. God is beyond and through all things. This allows God's mind to be perhaps the emergent coherence of the entire cosmos while still having a personal reality beyond it.
But panpsychism itself has challenges, right? Like the combination problem.
Absolutely. That's a big one.
Yeah.
If you have billions of tiny, simple consciousnesses in atoms or whatever, how do they combine to form one big, complex, unified consciousness like ours? How do the little minds add up to a big mind? It's a major philosophical hurdle, and interestingly, it loops right back to our earlier discussion about neural synchrony maybe being a mechanism for integrating information in the brain. It's the same problem. How do parts become a unified whole?
Okay, so panpsychism offers this idea of mind woven into everything, and fiction's panentheism gives it a divine source and container. This brings us neatly to process theology, which sounds like it has a lot in common with this emergent view.
It really does. Process theology, which stems largely from Alfred North Whitehead, completely flips the script on reality. Instead of seeing it as made of static things or substances, it sees reality as this vast, dynamic process of becoming. It's made up of momentary, interconnected events called actual occasions, each having both a physical aspect and a mental aspect, always reaching out towards new experiences.
Everything is flowing, changing.
Constantly. And in this view, even God isn't static. God has two natures, a primordial nature, the eternal unchanging potential, the ordering of possibilities, and a consequent nature, which is the dynamic, evolving accumulation of all the actual experiences happening in the entire universe. God feels the world's experiences.
So wait, as one process theologian put it, the world creates God just as God creates the world. God's experience glows as the universe grows.
That's the radical idea, yes.
Yeah.
God's consequent nature evolves and changes as it integrates all the world's becoming into the divine life.
Okay, let me try and unpack that. God isn't this distant, unchanging monarch, but is intimately involved, evolving with the universe, feeling everything. And our emergent souls, our experiences, become part of God's own ongoing becoming. That's huge.
Yeah. It is huge. And you can feel how fiction's writing breathes the same air, right? He constantly emphasizes God's immanence, God's responsiveness, this idea that relation precedes isolation. Even his relational view of the Trinity fits perfectly with this dynamic, interconnected picture of reality.
Yeah, it really does seem to provide a theological home for this emergent soul idea.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Process theology offers this robust framework where an emergent soul arising from connection and becoming makes perfect sense. It gives theological weight to the idea that mind-like qualities and divine presence aren't just added extras, but are woven right into the cosmic fabric, aligning so well with fiction's vision in Breath of the Cosmos.
And speaking of emergence, that leads us directly to emergence metaphysics itself. How do philosophers and theologians grapple with this idea of new things arising from complexity?
Well, many contemporary Christian thinkers are exploring what's called non-reductive physicalism.
Okay, what's that?
It's a way to say, yes, we are physical beings. Our minds depend on our brains. But the soul or consciousness isn't just reducible to brain chemistry. It's an emergent property of the physical body. The soul supervenes on the body, meaning it depends on the body's complex organization. It doesn't exist apart from it in this life. But it's not identical to it either. It's a higher level property.
So it arises from the physical, but isn't just the sum of the parts.
Exactly. Some proponents, like Philip Clayton, even argue for strong emergence, where the emergent mind can then exert top-down causation back onto the body. Your conscious intention can actually make neurons fire. It's not just a passive byproduct.
Right. My decision to lift my arm causes the physical action.
Precisely. And others, like Nancy Murphy or Malcolm Gies, talk about the soul as a pattern or a program running on the neural hardware. A pattern of information, relationships, and capacities that defines who you are. And they suggest maybe this pattern could be preserved by God and reinstantiated perhaps on a new body at the resurrection. And notice how fiction's language of the soul as a coherence or a pattern of being fits so neatly with this informational or pattern-based view.
Okay, but this raises that massive question again. What about the afterlife? If the soul is just an emergent pattern or program running on the brain, is it really real enough? Can it actually survive death when the hardware shuts down? This feels like a major departure from traditional views of an inherently immortal soul substance.
It absolutely is a departure, and it's a central point of tension. Traditional dualism, with its immaterial soul substance, has a straightforward answer for survival. Pure emergentism, strictly speaking, usually implies that when the physical base disappears, when the brain dies, the emergent property, the soul, ceases to exist.
Unless God steps in.
Unless some external power, like God, actively preserves that pattern, remembers it, holds it, and perhaps reconstitutes it later. And this seems to be where fiction lands. Remember his chapter title, The Final Observation, God is the Ultimate Witness,
Mm.
and his hints about being always held, always being watched by love.
Mm-hmm.
It strongly suggests that death isn't the end, because God's loving observation, God's holding of our pattern, never stops. In this view, God's attention sustains our being beyond physical death.
So it's a theological argument for continuity, but it relies entirely on God's ongoing action to preserve the pattern, not on the soul having its own independent, indestructible nature.
That seems to be the implication, yes. It's a way to affirm continuity while taking the neuroscience of brain dependence seriously. But it definitely reframes traditional notions of immortality.
Okay. Now, this whole emergent picture, while it integrates a lot, it's definitely not without its critics, as we've touched on. Philosophically, that idea of strong emergence, genuinely new properties with real downward causal power, it's still debated. Some critics say it's just a fancy way of saying magic happens here, right? That it doesn't really explain how mind arises from matter, it just asserts that it does.
That's a common critique, yes. That it might just be smuggling dualism back in without admitting it. Or it's a placeholder for something we don't understand yet.
And then there's the personal identity issue again. If I'm just this constantly changing emergent pattern, in what real sense am I the same person today as I was yesterday or will be tomorrow? Where's the continuity?
That's a classic philosophical puzzle for any view that denies a simple, unchanging soul substance. Emergentists often use analogies to respond. Think of a whirlpool in a river. It doesn't have sharp edges, the water is constantly flowing through it, yet it maintains a recognizable identity, a stable pattern over time. Similarly, they argue, the pattern of organization, our memories, personality traits, values, the narrative we construct, that's what carries on and provides continuity, even as the physical bits, the atoms in our body, are constantly being replaced. It's the form, the pattern, that persists.
That helps, but then we hit the theological hurdles again, the big one, the problem of evil. If God is everything, or if everything is in God, pantheism, then doesn't that mean all the suffering, all the horror is somehow also part of God? That's deeply troubling for many.
It is arguably the biggest challenge, especially for traditional Christian theology, where God's absolute goodness is fundamental. Fiction's panentheist approach tries to navigate this carefully. He suggests evil isn't a thing created by God, but occurs when parts of the system misalign with the divine coherence. It's like destructive interference, a disruption of the harmony.
So like static on the radio signal?
Kind of. He even uses that analogy of decoherence in the fall. He sees the biblical fall not as one past event, but as this ongoing tendency towards fragmentation, isolation, breaking unity, collapsing into lower potentials, driven by fear or selfishness. And ethically, he argues, seeing others with judgment actually contributes to this fragmentation. It collapses them into guilt, while seeing with love helps restore coherence, collapsing them towards wholeness.
So evil is misalignment, disharmony, fragmentation within the divine field.
That's his framing, yes. But critics would immediately jump on this, arguing it potentially trivializes evil. Does it take seriously the reality of deliberate cruelty, of radical rebellion against good? Is it reducing sin to just being out of tune?
Yeah, that feels less weighty than traditional concepts of sin.
And pastorally, some might find it cold. If God only acts within the natural processes of emergence and coherence, does that leave room for divine intervention against suffering? Or does it lean towards a kind of quietism? Just accept things and try to align yourself, rather than praying for God to change circumstances.
That leads straight into the broader theological orthodoxy concerns. I mean, how does this sit with traditional Christianity? Critics could easily label fiction's system as, well, not quite Christian, maybe Gnosticism, maybe New Age thinking disguised. If we're essentially part of God, or if the divine is just the coherence of the cosmos, what happens to core ideas like needing repentance, salvation through Christ, having a personal relationship with God as a distinct other?
Right. Does prayer just become talking to yourself or trying to tune into the universe?
Is sin just ignorance of our unity and salvation just enlightenment? Is Christ reduced from a unique divine savior to maybe just a highly coherent guru who showed us the way?
These are the tough questions. Fiction tries to maintain a balance. He does affirm God transcends the world, beyond and through them, but the emphasis is heavily on finding God within, on realizing our inherent unity.
But his reinterpretations are radical. The fall as decoherence from unity. Salvation as collapsing into the divine image through love. It's imaginative, but is it still recognizably Christian doctrine?
Historically, views resembling pantheism have often been condemned by mainstream Christianity. Affirming creation out of nothing, ex nihilo, was partly aimed against ideas that the world is made of God. And lines like fictions, "You are the reflection in which God sees himself," while beautiful, sound much closer to Sufi mysticism or Hindu Vedanta than, say, the Apostle Paul.
So, is his vision still Christian, or has it drifted into a kind of Christian-flavored pantheistic mysticism? Where does it land?
Well, as Joanna Leidenhag points out, ideas like panpsychism can be theologically flexible. Fiction works hard to keep God personal, loving, and active observer, even with these radical redefinitions. By leaning into panentheism, the world in God, but God also exceeding the world, he finds ground that's more acceptable to modern liberal theology. But conservative theology would almost certainly still see it as problematic, blurring crucial distinctions between creator and creation.
And practically speaking, maybe this whole quantum theology thing is just too intellectual, too high concept. Could it alienate people looking for straightforward faith or simple comfort, especially in times of grief?
That's a valid practical critique, too. It's a very conceptual, metaphorical spirituality he's offering. It might resonate deeply with some, but feel abstract or unsatisfying to others who prefer a more traditional, interventionist view of God or a simpler path to faith.
And finally, circling back to the soul's continuity and the afterlife. We touched on this, but the challenge remains. If the soul isn't a separate substance, how can it survive death?
Fiction's implicit answer, as we discussed, seems to rely heavily on God's continuous observation holding our pattern, our potential, beyond physical life. It's similar to process theology, where God remembers and integrates all past experiences into the divine memory.
But that's different from the traditional hope of resurrection of the same person.
Right.
Recognizably, you or me. This sounds more like we become a memory or a quality within God, unless God explicitly reconstitutes us.
It is different, yes. It implies our existence post-death is dependent on God's memory and potential action, not on an inherent immortality of our own soul substance. Fiction does play with that speculative quantum angle. Maybe the soul's waveform just doesn't collapse at death because God, the ultimate observer, hasn't made the final measurement yet. It stays in superposition within God's quantum memory until a final collapse at the resurrection.
That's speculative, but like you said, an oddly fitting image within his whole framework.
It is. But for people who hold dear the idea of personal immortality, of recognizing loved ones in the afterlife, a purely emergent view like this often feels like it needs something extra, a miracle of recreation, a new emergent body provided by God. Fiction offers an imaginative possibility, but traditional faith often prefers clearer, more definite terms about what endures.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground, navigating some really complex territory. After digging through all the science, philosophy, theology, and fiction's provocative ideas, let's try to pull out the most powerful alignments. Where does fiction's vision resonate most strongly with current thinking? One huge one seems to be the shift across many fields, moving away from seeing reality as just a collection of separate things, separate substances, toward understanding it as fundamentally relational.
Absolutely. That's a major convergence. Fiction's whole system, rooted in his Christian panentheism, hammers this home. Relation precedes isolation. True identity, he argues, is only found in relationship.
And modern physics echoes this, doesn't it? It abandoned that old Newtonian picture of independent particles bouncing around.
It did. Now, a particle is seen more like a bundle of relations. Its properties, its very state, only have meaning in the context of its interactions with fields and other particles. Its identity is its connections.
And we see the same in human sciences. Relational psychology, sociology, they all stress that our identity isn't formed in a vacuum, but within a web of relationships. It reminds me of the African concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are. That resonates so strongly with fiction's entangled hearts idea. No soul is isolated, every heart is a quantum echo of another.
And we even have the scientific correlates, like mirror neurons, showing how our inner states literally echo each other, or process theology describing reality itself as this fabric of interdependent events. What's really striking is this widespread paradigm shift you mentioned, visible across so many disciplines. It's a move toward seeing that nothing truly exists in isolation. Everything is defined and shaped by the network of connections it's part of. Interconnectedness seems fundamental.
Yeah, like isolation is the illusion, connection is the reality.
Precisely.
Another strong alignment is this theme of underlying unity and coherence emerging from diversity, from multiplicity. Fiction uses these powerful analogies comparing the Trinity's unity and diversity to quantum entanglement, where separate particles share one state.
Right, the idea of distinctness within unity.
And he brings up the holographic principle, too, suggesting the whole is somehow encoded in each part. You are the reflection in which God sees himself.
And again, this isn't just poetry. We see parallels in neuroscience, with vast networks of neurons synchronizing their firing, oscillating in unison to create a single, unified, conscious experience. Like that gamma synchrony we talked about, it's literally many parts forming one coherent whole.
And in physics, coherence is key. Think of a laser aligning the phases of countless individual photons creates that powerful unified beam.
Exactly. And fiction uses this language of coherence constantly. Love releases a wave of coherence across unseen fields. Morality becomes quantum alignment with the fields of divine relationality.
So coherence seems to be this bridging concept, doesn't it? A shared language between science and spirituality, where coherence means harmony, integration, unity of purpose.
I think that's a great way to put it. This conceptual symmetry physics, talking about coherence versus decoherence, spirituality about harmony versus discord, neuroscience about integration versus fragmentation, it creates this fertile ground for dialogue. It doesn't prove spiritual claims, of course, but it offers a shared vocabulary that resonates. You even hear it in everyday language, like churches talking about finding resonance in worship or individuals seeking inner harmony. Coherence is a powerful, unifying idea.
And the third big alignment, the active role of the observer, the participator, in co-creating reality. Science itself has really undermined that old idea of the detached, objective observer, hasn't it?
It really has. Quantum mechanics shows the observer is intrinsically part of the system, influencing the outcome just by looking. And cognitive science, especially with predictive processing, shows our own minds aren't passive receivers. Our expectations, our internal models, literally shape what we perceive.
Yeah.
We actively construct our reality. And fiction takes this principle and elevates it theologically. God is the ultimate observer, the ultimate consciousness who calls reality into being through divine attention. And humans made in that image are observers made flesh. We become co-creators, participating with God in the ongoing unfolding of the universe through our own attention, choices, and actions.
It kind of democratizes creation, doesn't it? Aligns with process theology's idea that we co-create the future with God, not just passively receive it.
It does. And we see analogs of this observer effect everywhere in human life. A teacher's belief in a student can genuinely help them succeed. A therapist's compassionate, non-judgmental witnessing can be profoundly healing. Think about it. When we feel truly seen, truly known and loved, we often become more fully ourselves, don't we? More real.
Absolutely.
It's that quantum analogy of collapse by observation. It aligns incredibly well with these deep psychological truths about validation, recognition, and the power of a loving gaze, human or divine, to call forth our best self, to help our highest potentials coalesce into reality.
And fiction really pushes this, blurring the line between, say, a moral act and its physical consequences. Loving your neighbor isn't just obeying a commandment.
He says it generates reality,
Yeah.
shapes what exists.
Yeah.
An act of love can literally create community, mend relationships, turn an enemy into a friend. It genuinely brings a new, more coherent reality into being. It's ontology, not just ethics.